Hello and welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. We're discussing brutal killings of 2018. And so we have an upcoming schedule for you. We're going to be talking about the Kris Watts sentencing right now, and then at 3 p.m. Anthony Kirkland, 2 haunting cases from 2018. Now, the Kris Watts sentencing hearing happened just a couple months ago, and if you recall, Kris Watts was the Colorado man who was accused and then pled guilty to killing his pregnant wife and 2 young children. Absolute brutal murder. And at first, he appeared, as you can see, on television, pleading for their safe return. But after he failed a polygraph test, his stories started to change, and he finally confessed to killing his entire family. You're going to hear now from the hearing. While there was no trial, there was a hearing in which Mr. Watts got 3 life sentences without parole. Let's listen in. Welcome back. We just saw a piece of the haunting interrogation video of Kris Watts, but with me is Andell Brown. He's another legal analyst to give us some perspective on the Kris Watts case. Thank you so much for being here, Andell.
My pleasure.
So let's just briefly talk about this interrogation video. What are your initial thoughts based on that brief clip we just saw?
Well, obviously there are many opportunities for Kris Watts to be forthcoming with law enforcement about what really happened and to end the charade as if he was bewildered and looking for his family, and it seems like he didn't take them. Furthermore, the detective is pressing him about being dishonest not only with them, but with members of his family and other people.
Yes, Andell, that's spot on. So let's continue to watch this truly chilling, interrogation video. Let's take a look.
Is it possible that a woman and 2 kids are just completely gone off the face of the earth?
Honestly, I have nothing on my hands. I did nothing to those kids or her to make them vanish.
So tell me what happened then. I believe you that you did nothing on your hands. What happened?
When I left, I mean, it's on video that I left and I was in my truck. I didn't load anything into my truck besides my tools, my container, my book bag, my water jug, my lunchbox.
Okay. But then what happened?
I drove out of the driveway.
No, before you drove out of the driveway. What happened with your wife and your kids?
I didn't do anything like that. They were still in the house.
Where are they? Where did they go?
I don't know, sir. I really don't know.
Your wife's not the type of person to vanish.
I know she's not.
She had 10 things on her schedule that meant she was going to be there the next day, that day, the day after that, with friends, with a doctor. Okay? She didn't leave because she wanted to.
Right.
So what happened?
I didn't do anything to her or the kids.
Was it an accident?
I didn't do anything.
Was it an accident?
There was no accident. I don't know if there was an accident in the house. I wasn't there for it.
It's a big deal if it's an accident, because we can work with that, Kris.
No.
And I think that's maybe what happened.
I did not call it an accident. I didn't do anything to my wife and kids.
Was it a misunderstanding?
There's no misunderstanding. We had that talk. There was a misunderstanding where I didn't tell her about the affair.
Did she name you something?
She did anything to these kids. We both love them with all our hearts. There's no way.
It could have been an accident. Something happened in the house that you know about. You failed the polygraph test, right? This is not about, did you leave and your wife vanished and you didn't know anything about it. That was not what you were asked, okay?
Okay.
We know that something happened to all 3 of them. But I want to know, did something happen to these baby girls first that you had to take into your own hands and deal with?
You had to clean it up for Shanann.
Kris, you gotta tell us. There's something that happened to these baby girls. Look at them.
I know. Before you came in, I was watching videos.
We have no doubt you love these girls with all of your heart. I have no doubt. But we make mistakes.
That's okay.
Because it's what we do with those mistakes that make us who we are.
Kris, it seems like you're thinking about it right now. What are you thinking about?
She couldn't have.
I feel like you cleaned up for her. I feel like that's the type of guy that you are.
What you're watching is a Kris Watts interrogation, more of that interrogation between him and the police. Now, Andell, he's very adamant here that he didn't do anything. He's still denying it, but they keep mentioning the failed polygraph test. How significant is that at this point?
Well, when they're in an interrogation room, officers are going to use anything at their disposal that's going to help them get a confession out of a suspect. The polygraph test, while it's not admissible in court, it looms large in many people's minds. They think that, you know what, this lie detector test is probably infallible and they've got me. They're trying to indicate to him they've got him dead to rights. Now is not the time to lie. We can help you if you come clean and tell the truth. They're trying to get a confession out of him by any means necessary.
And what I want to know more about is why wasn't there a lawyer in the room? I mean, this seems, again, another worst nightmare for any defense attorney. I'm presuming they read him his Miranda rights before they interrogated him, but this seems like advice that no defense attorney would ever give.
Right. We never want our clients to make statements without us being there, and in many cases not to make statements at all, because it doesn't help someone that is being accused of a crime. This is one of the cases where not only investigators but attorneys have to be careful, because the investigators initially, they're probably starting off on a fact-finding mission, so they talk to the husband who's reported the wife missing, but at some point they change hats. Now they're investigating him as a suspect, and it comes into question whether or not he's aware that those statements can.
Yes, of course, and any inconsistency is going to come back and potentially, bite the defendant if they were to go to trial. So let's take a brief break, and we'll be back with more of the Kris Watts sentencing hearing and interrogation. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. We're continuing our coverage of the Kris Watts hearing and interrogation. We're about to hear more from Kris Watts, what he's saying, his first lies, which are eventually going to come back to haunt him. Let's take a listen.
Anything else you want to tell me? What's going on? Or what happened or anything? Or you know anything about it?
When we had that conversation that morning, it was emotional. It was told her about separation and everything like that.
Mm-hmm. What happened after that?
I went downstairs and I don't want to protect her.
What?
I don't want to protect her.
You don't want to protect her?
I don't know what else to say.
What happened? Huh? She hurt him?
Yeah. And then
What now?
I thought about her.
You hurt her? Did they leave after that for a long time? So she started hurting kids.
Paper.
Probably because what happened. What? She smelled it. Or choking. No.
I didn't hear anything. When I was downstairs, I came back up and they were gone. I don't know, letting me talking to her about that. separation and everything about, and she lost it. I don't know, like, what else to say. It's like, I freaked out. Those are my kids.
She freaked out over the separation of everything.
Like, she laid back down, but that's not downstairs, but I heard like a little commotion upstairs, but I didn't think anything of it.
Mm-hmm. And then you went back upstairs and she was...
Never, I could see, like, she was not.
Not choking after that. Did she kill her?
They're blue.
Both of them?
Yeah.
She choked both of them down.
I freaked out in the champagne. How was it? I didn't like call cops about it.
So you wanted to be all the bodies off or something?
I mean, I didn't know what else to do. I freaked out. I didn't know nothing else to do. I didn't know what to do.
So she killed Lucy and choked them to death.
And so we're listening to Kris Watts actually speak with his father in one of the interrogation rooms. Andell, thank you again for being here with us. I want to break this down a little bit because what we're hearing is something very important. It's the first pivotal lie in this case where he says that his wife actually killed the kids. He didn't do it. What is the significance of that?
Well, I think from a prosecution standpoint, it goes into the mindset of Christopher Watts and why he continues to avoid responsibility. He continues to manipulate and twist the facts because it seems like like the relationships and affairs that he was carrying on, he puts himself above all the other people in his life.
It certainly seems so with those lies that he's telling his father. And another interesting aspect of this is, do you think that he realizes that this conversation is not private? It does seem that he's intending it to be private with his father, but clearly we're watching it now. It's tape recorded. What are your thoughts on that?
He may have very well thought this was a private conversation, but it is in a police station interrogation room, and those are places where your conversations are typically recorded. It's something he should have been aware of, and I think you alluded to the fact earlier, this is why this is a defense attorney's nightmare. You have a client in an unfamiliar situation, an unfamiliar location, doing things that he should not do, and any lawyer would know better than that.
Certainly. Seems to be very damaging testimony. We're going to hear a little bit more testimony from Shanann's family. It's very emotional. Let's take a listen.
You monster. Thought you would get away with this. I don't know how. The cameras do not lie. You carry them out like trash of the house. Yes. I seen the videotape. You buried my daughter Shannon and Nico in a shallow grave. And then you put Bella and Celeste in used containers of crude oil. You heartless monster. You have to live with this vision every day of your life. And I hope you see that every time you close your eyes at night. Oh, I forgot. You have no heart or feelings or love. Let me tell you something. I will think of them every day of my life. And I love them every day of my life. Prison is too good for you. This is hard to say, but may God have mercy on your soul. I hope you enjoy your new life. It's nothing like the one you had out here. May the courts have no mercy on you. It's hard every day. It hurts in so many ways. I have heard people say that you're not a monster. No, you are not. You're an evil monster. Thank you. Love you, Shannon, Bella, and Nico. Love you, Pop and Dad. And one other thing. And Shannon says she is super excited for justice today. Thank you, Your Honor.
I wanted to say thank you for this moment. I want to take a moment to thank everyone who has prayed for our beloved family, who had sent gifts, cards to us from all over the world. I know God will put the evil people where they need to be. I have no idea who gave you the right to take their lives. But I know God and his mighty angels were there at that moment to bring them home to paradise. God gives us free will. So not only did you take the family of four, your family of four, you took your own life. I want the world to know that our daughter and her children were so loved by us. They will always be protected by God and his mighty angels. I didn't want death for you because that's not my right. Your life is between you and God now, and I pray that he has mercy for you. From Shannon's mother, Bella Marie, Celeste Catherine, and Nico Lee's Nana. Thank you, Your Honor.
And that was more emotional testimony from the family. And one of the statements that was said by Shannon's father, I trusted you to take care of them and not kill them, was especially poignant. Now, Andell, I have a question for you. This sentencing hearing, what is the purpose of the sentencing hearing, especially since this was a negotiated plea deal?
Well, I think here what the judge is doing is exactly what we just saw, giving the family members and the other people affected an opportunity to speak out on this heinous crime and what happened, and to be heard by the court and the public in this matter. I think that's what the court wants to do. Obviously, he is going to be sentenced to the maximum according to the plea deal, which is life in prison without the possibility of parole. But at least their family has an opportunity to stand and face him and tell them exactly what's on their mind.
And do you think that there's anything that Kris Watts could say or do, or any witnesses Kris Watts' attorneys could have put on to persuade the judge to give him a different sentence?
I think they could have tried, and it would have been futile. When it comes to what Kris Watts could say, I think there are many questions that are left unanswered as to why this happened and how it happened. I think if he answered some of those questions, it may not sway the judge, but it would absolutely bring some closure and comfort to a family that's already suffering a great loss.
Yes, I agree. Extremely emotional testimony out of the Kris Watts hearing. We're going to have more on Kris Watts right after this break. We're going to hear from the Assistant District Attorney in just a few moments. Stay tuned.
We know that he slowly took her life the morning of August 13th. We know that this was not done in an uncontrolled, vengeful manner that he tried to describe to agents from CBI and the FBI. If that were the case, you would expect to see vicious, horrible bruising about her neck, shoulders, and face. You would expect to see the hyoid bone in her neck broken. Even worse, what must Bella, age 4, and Celeste, age 3, must have experienced or thought as their father, the one man on this planet who was supposed to nurture and protect them, was snuffing out their lives. They both died from smothering. Let me say that again. The man seated to my right smothered his daughters. Why? Imagine the horror in Bella's mind as her father took her last breaths away. Your Honor, understand very clearly, Bella fought back for her life. The frenulum, the connective tissue between her upper lip and her gum, had a centimeter and a half laceration. She bit her tongue multiple times before she died. She fought back for her life as her father smothered her.
And that was some testimony by the ADA Michael Rourke on this case. And what we're hearing is never before heard facts about this case. Before this hearing, those hadn't been common knowledge. And what he's talking about are truly disturbing. You just heard him talk about the damage done to baby Bella's body. It's really horrific. Andell, I want to talk to you about how important this ADA's testimony is, especially when there's no trial.
I think it's extremely important for the public to understand the heinous nature of this crime, as well as the court. Obviously, he's speaking to the judge who makes the sentencing decision. He's making sure the judge understands the extreme nature of this crime that may not have come out before until we got these disturbing details. He talks about the betrayal of trust of Shannon, who was Kris Watts' wife, as well as his own daughters, who he was supposed to protect, specifically Bella in this case, and fighting for her life as her father took her life away by snuffing it out, by smothering her.
Do you think this was almost like a mini trial to give the family closure? Because again, we're talking about this. It doesn't seem that this hearing was even necessary in terms of the judge was inevitably going to give them life without parole, or so it seems. So do you think that this is just a piece of closure for them, a trial of sorts?
Absolutely. I think it means we cannot measure the value to a hurting, grieving family, suffering loss, that it is to hear Kris Watts have to listen to the prosecution speak about the nature of his crimes and do and say things that they cannot do on their own. So I think it is very much for the benefit of the family and other people in the community that are suffering the loss of Shannon and the two girls.
It's truly devastating testimony. It's heart-wrenching, and we're going to hear more about this Kris Watts sentencing hearing, what ultimately he is sentenced to, right when we get back from this break.
About how to get him?
Yeah. Does someone have to climb up to the top and unscrew something and then lower something down to get them?
They're like just a hatch on the top, and they're like 20-foot tanks.
How far down are they?
Wherever the food level is in the tank, I'm not sure.
Okay. What was it when you were there?
I don't know. I didn't.
Okay.
I wasn't looking into that.
Okay. All right.
You may go out there or no?
I don't think so. Would you prefer not to?
I didn't know if you needed help getting there.
Yeah, I don't know. I think once we got that picture, because we didn't really know how much about the location that the other police officers knew, but it sounds like they knew somehow right how to get to 319. So, and I think that's how they got that picture.
That was more of the Kris Watts interrogation. We hear him confessing to where he dumped the bodies. Now, Andell, is there any way of coming back from that? Is there any way he can now go to trial despite making this stunning admission?
Well, that admission as to dumping the bodies doesn't by itself preclude him from going to trial, because what ultimately has to be proven is that he was the cause of death, and if he wasn't acting in some other way. I think initially what he stated in trying to mitigate his responsibility was that Shannon had killed the two girls and that he, in a fit of rage, strangled her after she had strangled them. So if that were the case, he would not have been guilty of their killings, his two daughters. He would have simply been possibly guilty of disposing of the bodies in an unlawful way, but their death would not have been his responsibility. So he could have gone to trial on those facts if he were to be believed.
Yeah, there's still a possibility that he could have gone to trial, but the interrogation was no doubt damaging. Now let's go to hearing the judge announce the verdict in this case.
Attorneys, the court has considered the statements made by the victims in this case. The court's going to find that the plea agreement is fair and reasonable under the circumstances. I want to acknowledge the Rusick family as well as the Watts family, that showing mercy on Mr. Watts is understood, and I respect that decision to request that the district attorney not seek the death penalty in this case. And so the court is going to accept this plea bargain under the circumstances. Words that come to mind when I hear the evidence in this case are a senseless crime and the viciousness of the crime. And equally aggravating in this court's determination is the despicable act of disposing of the bodies in the manner in which they were done in this case. I've been a judicial officer now for starting my 17th year, and I could objectively say that this is perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime that I have handled out of the thousands of cases that I have seen. And nothing less than a maximum sentence would be appropriate, and anything less than the maximum sentence would depreciate the seriousness of this offense. So the court is going to sentence Mr. Watts as follows. With regard to count number 1, murder in the first degree as it relates to Shanann Watts, the court is going to sentence you, sir, to a life sentence in the Colorado Department of Corrections, followed, with no possibility of parole. And that is going to run consecutively to all but counts 3 and 4. With regard to count 2, as it relates to murder in the first degree with Bella, the court is going to sentence you to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole. With regard to count number 3, the court is going to sentence you as it relates to Celeste to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole. With regard to counts 4 and 5 relating to Bella and Celeste as a different theory of first-degree murder, the court is going to sentence you to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections, and legally those sentences must run concurrently as a different theory of first-degree murder. Recognizing the unlawful termination of pregnancy for the unborn child that has been named Nico, the court absolutely believes that the maximum sentence of 48 years would be appropriate to run consecutive to the other charges, with an additional mandatory parole period of 3 years as set forth by statute. With regard to count number 7, as it relates to tampering with a deceased body, as well as counts 8 and 9, each a class 3 felony, the court is going to impose a maximum sentence of 12 years each for those counts to run consecutively to the other counts. The court is going to order that the statutory fees be paid and court costs. The court's going to grant the prosecution 91 days to file a notice of restitution.
So you hear from the judge, he is standing by the plea bargain in this case. Kris Watts is most certainly going to die in prison. The judge calling this senseless, vicious, and despicable. And Andell, this was expected, wasn't it?
It absolutely was expected. I could not see the judge in good conscience, knowing the facts of this case, doing anything else but sentencing Kris Watts to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole.
Is there going to be any appeal process in this case?
There may be an appeal, but I don't see much success in that, as this was a negotiated plea bargain unless there was some gross misconduct by his attorneys or ineffective assistance of counsel that caused him to go into this plea. That is not apparent here, but I don't see an appeal going very far in this case. There was no trial. There are no motions. There was no evidence introduced. It was a plea bargain, a very simple matter of him deciding it's in his best interest to accept guilt in this case and avoid the death penalty, which is what they were trying to do.
Thank you so much for your opinion today, Andell. Was very insightful in your commentary on the Kris Watts case. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And there you have it, the Kris Watts sentencing hearing. He will die in prison. He was sentenced to life without parole. We have next the Anthony Kirkland resentencing, so please stay tuned. It was a pleasure to be your host this afternoon. Have a wonderful night, and remember to stay tuned for the Anthony Kirkland resentencing coming up in just moments.